Alrighty, good morning. Going to talk about some root modifications today. Um, so just basically some other things that can develop off of your roots. The first type of modification we're going to talk about are structures called prop roots. They're adventitious roots, so it's kind of like the fibrous root system of the monocots. So there's tons of roots spreading out. There's no one single main root. They're just kind of a big mass of roots. In this case, these are going to form above ground instead of below. And their job is to provide additional support for plants. You find these in corn plants, which I'm sure you've seen those. The structure I've shown, or the drawing I've had, is it's only showing the two, but obviously they can go all the way around the plant, or all the way around the stem there. So now there's, of course, these are modifications, so they're not the primary roots, so there's still roots below ground. But, so yeah. The second type of roots modification that we're going to talk about are the aerial roots. So aerial meaning above ground in the air, I guess is what it implies. But these are going to do the same thing as the prop roots. They're going to serve as additional support and structure. So I've shown you a little flower that's growing there, and that's called a structure that grows using aerial roots is called an epiphyte. So an example of that would be an orchid. So those aerial roots are there to help anchor the plant, but also to get some absorption of nutrients. So for poison ivy, it actually grows on top of other plants as well. So it's there, those aerial roots are just there as support. Alrighty, your nematophores, those are the next set of modifications that you can have. They're found in mangroves, if you're at all familiar with those. But basically it's like upside down roots. So instead of growing down, they grow up. They're going to be found in aquatic plants that experience high and low tides. On my drawing here, it's showing you've got the main trunk of the plant there with some roots, but then you've got the nematophores coming out of it that have grown out, that are those extensions. And I've drawn two areas of growth there. Or sorry, two areas of where the high tide is and where the low tide is. Oftentimes these particular plants are growing in mud, and so they need to ensure that they can still go through aerobic respiration. So in order to get that oxygen, they shoot these nematophores above the surface of the water to ensure that they can grab oxygen from the atmosphere. So those are what nematophores are. Supposedly, when I was going through college, I didn't actually look. I probably should have. Supposedly, the bald cypress that's native here to Missouri is very similar to mangroves, but they've never been proven that they have these nematophores, but at the time, which was 10 years ago, um, they were thought to potentially have these nematophores. So another root modification that your plants can have would be to serve as food storage, or to develop service food storage, actually eat. There's modified stems. So if you recall, when we were doing the stem anatomy, we talked about the rhizomes, the tubers, and the corms. So ginger was the example of the rhizome, and then off of the rhizome you can have these tubers growing, which would be potatoes. So your red and white potatoes, your russet potatoes, those would be considered modified stems. And that's, even though they're technically, we're talking about roots, I decided to stick them in here. Your modified roots would be things like carrots, turnips, parsnips. Sweet potatoes are actually modified roots, they aren't considered tubers like their other family friends, the red and white potatoes. So root modification / in this case stem modification that can develop. You can also have root modifications that allow your plants to be parasitic. There are some plants who lack chlorophyll, and so they produce these roots called Hesperia, which then burrow into the host plant. Specifically, they're going to tap into the vascular tissue of that host plant to derive the nutrients and water and other necessary foodstuffs that they're going to need, like sugar. Since they don't have chlorophyll, they can't go through photosynthesis. So mistletoe is actually considered to be a partial parasite. Your tree can survive with mistletoe if it doesn't spread throughout. I can't remember. It's very specific, but your tree can usually survive with some of the mistletoe on there before it burrows all the way in there. But then once it actually spreads to the entire branch, the tree would end up dying, and therefore the mistletoe would as well. So the other parasite worth noting is one called a dodder. Kind of looks like a string. It's orange and coiled. It actually burrows all the way into the plant, and then actually is that particular one is tapping into the xylem and the phloem, and deriving all the necessary nutrients that it needs to survive. The next one that we've got are root nodules. This is a symbiotic relationship. So in this case, both of them tend to benefit. You're going to find them mostly in the legume family. Beans, peas, nuts, those types of plants. So your plants need nitrogen to function for some of the chemical processes that they go through. The atmosphere actually contains about 78% nitrogen. And so plants will go through this process called nitrogen fixation to try to convert that nitrogen in the atmosphere into a usable form that they can utilize. So what happens here with these root nodules, there's this bacteria that work in conjunction with these plants. It's called the Rhizobium bacteria. It's underlined because that is the genus. So will enter these plants through the root hairs, make their way to the cortex, and then release chemicals which cause those parenchyma cells that make up the cortex to undergo mitosis. So they start dividing, and then they start growing these small little balls that attach to the roots, and those are called nodules. And I've I've drawn that on the picture there. So, reason why the bacteria is a good thing is that the bacteria are able to help the plant convert that nitrogen. So, and then in the process they make these little growth balls. So, all right. The next type of root modification that can grow is a fungus symbiotic relationship. Specifically, they're called the mycorrhizae. So again, both parties gain. Basically, what the fungus mycorrhizae does for the plant is it helps that root absorb more nutrients and water. And then the fungi gets some nutrients in the form of sugars from the photosynthesis that the plant goes through. There's two different versions of the mycorrhizae. You've got endomycorrhizae and ectomycorrhizae, and then the prefixes kind of indicate to you whether or not the endomycorrhizae are obviously going to go into the root cells. That's from the endo prefix there. So when they do that, you end up getting these swellings called vesicles into the roots, or other masses of cells called arbuscules. This particular version is very common in the tropic areas. So you're going to get these branch structures, like I said, either arbuscules or swellings within the cell called vesicles. The ectomycorrhizae they're not actually, that particular version is not going to actually go into the root cells. It's going to go around it. It actually does get into the epidermis, but it doesn't get past that into the actual protoplast of the cell. So these particular versions are going to be really common in temperate areas. So this particular version, this relationship is common in like pine or oak trees. The last version, or the last modification that we're going to talk about, are contractile roots. It's your last picture that I've drawn you there. So we've got contractile roots are going to develop from the bottom of your stem, or it could be, it's the base of that stem, of either a bulb or acorn. Remember, those are stem modifications. So what they actually end up doing is they end up pulling that shoot apical meristem below ground. In case there's changes in the weather, like a drought. It allows that shoot apical meristem to kind of be protected if needed. So the drawing that I have there, you've got your you've got your roots there, and you've got the cortex on the outside, and eventually what happens is they collapse on each other, and so those parenchyma cells in the cortex just collapse. And what that does is it pulls that stem down. So you kind of think of it like a fully extended accordion or something, and then as those things collapse, the accordion starts to get shorter. And so that's why or how the shoot apical meristem is able to be pulled underground. Eventually, it looks kind of like the root, contractile roots are going to kind of look like that, that picture there on the right. So those roots are going to pull it underground. So members of the lily family have contractile roots. So this kind of wraps up your root modifications. We've got one more set of notes before your test. So luckily, so we'll kind of slow down next week a little bit, and we'll have one set of notes, and then we'll review. So you've got a quiz tomorrow. If you have any questions, please let me know. Don't forget you will need to draw a dicot stem or a monocot stem. I'm not going to tell you which one, but you're going to have to draw one of them with all the labels. So that's why you're going to be drawing both of them to at least practice it once before your quiz tomorrow. So, and your roots aren't going to be on there at all, so you don't have to worry about that. But your stem anatomy and everything before that is fair game. So, like I said, you can guarantee that you're going to have to draw one of those stems. So, like I said earlier, if you have questions, just let me know. Otherwise, I hope you have a good day.